So today's workshop, we're calling it a workshop. Normally we have in-person workshops, but because of the current situation, we're doing this online. And we welcome many of you who are participating with Earthquake Country Alliance Southern California for the first time. You see, we now have over 260 participants. We expect many more to join us this morning. The topic is concurrent disasters. What if an earthquake occurred during a pandemic? And of course, disasters can happen. In fact, if you've seen the news, there are dam failures in Michigan happening right now where people are having to evacuate. So that could happen here. Other disasters could happen here. And of course, we can have earthquakes. I'd like to introduce our co-chair, Earthquake Country Alliance Southern California, who will be moderating today's workshop, Margaret Vinci from Caltech Earthquake Programs, and Heidi Rosofsky from Global Vision Consortium. Margaret, make sure you're off mute.
The lips moving, don't hear anything. So we want to welcome all of you to our second quarterly workshop for the Earthquake Country Alliance for Southern California. And in this time of COVID-19, we're all adjusting to the new normal, safe at home, and of course the world of Zoom. So all of us kind of working through this, so excuse if we make any errors today, this is all new. But we wanted to keep all of our ECA associates connected. That is a big part of the Earthquake Country Alliance is our networking, being able to work together, being able to share ideas, what we're doing, for the ECA to then go ahead and create resources that you can use in your environment. And so we wanted to keep that going even in this world of COVID. So we hope the information that we will be sharing with you today is going to be informative and useful for all of you to continue to assist your communities and to making us all disaster resilient. Heidi?
And I'm Heidi Rosofsky. Obviously, I echo what Margaret had to say. But again, we've all been thinking and have had our eyes focused on the COVID. And as we all have been recognizing, in the state, we've been, our governor here in California has also started to speak about wildfires, which we've had enough growth for that to be of great concern this coming year. And the concurrent disaster situation, we've seen the earthquake that happened in Las Vegas, and we've got a named storm, in the Gulf that has already occurred. So we can't take our eyes off that ball. And we have an opportunity to be able to harness the awareness that people have. And that's one of the things I think we'll be talking about today is how do we take something that is a negative and turn it into a positive to help people become more resilient. So we're very happy to have you all here, and we hope we can provide you with a lot of great information that gets the brain cells firing and helps you to look at things with fresh eyes.
Yeah, and I think one of those positives is the communication. I think that the communication during this event has been great, both from our state leaders, our county leaders, our city leaders, our local leaders, and I think the communication has really been great. And this has been, I think, one of the positives coming out of COVID, to be able to use this communication to make fear a little less impending and to make us all comfortable as to what our next steps are going to be. So our agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about what is Earthquake Country Alliance. We have 500 people visiting us today and attending this meeting. Some of you may or may not be familiar with Earthquake Country Alliance. So for others, this will be a review, but for those new people to be able to share with you, what is Earthquake Country Alliance? What are some of the activities and resources that we can provide to you? And then we will then have Jenny Novak from Cal OES talking about how we will respond to an earthquake during COVID. So we are a multi-hazard state. If we had an earthquake right now, how is that going to change our response with the COVID era? And then Heidi, who is an expert with DAFN, is going to talk about teachable moments with the DAFN community during with earthquake preparedness. I will give you a 5-minute presentation on a resource called Map Your Neighborhood, and then Mark will talk about secure your spacing, which can be done now during COVID, and ECA statewide activities, and catching you up again on some of the resources that Earthquake Country Alliance can provide us.
For those of you who are new, one of the things that you may not be used to is some of the abbreviations and acronyms. And DAFN stands for Disabilities, Access, and Functional Needs, and we'll get into later as to who that audience is. So if you hear something that you don't know or don't understand, you know, jot it down into the chat room or something. It may be something that can be answered rapidly. Sorry, back
Thank
to you,
Heidi.
Margaret.
Actually, it's the next slide, and I think it's on to you. What is Earthquake Country Alliance?
Are you clicking or am I? Okay,
There we
thank
go.
you. Okay, so Earthquake Country Alliance is a brainchild of some folks who decided that in 2003 that we really needed to expand the ability of reaching people and really coming together and harnessing all of the groups that were trying to prepare for an earthquake here in California. And then in 2009, after the first shakeout, it really kind of started to bloom. We have 1,500 plus public, private, and grassroots leaders who come together and work on different projects and are involved in the shakeout, the Great Shakeout, who share resources and best practices. And so it's a great place to come to find that better mousetrap. We have statewide sector-based committees where we take a look at what people are doing and see, you know, look at it in the broader picture and what can we do to make sure that we can disseminate, you know, that better information, incorporate it in, adapt it to whatever's going on, update it. So there's a lot of committees going on that are working. Somebody is moving the slides and I wasn't. Hold on just a minute. Thank you. And then we have the regional alliances and local events and outreach campaigns, and a lot of our support comes from the California Office of Emergency Services, without whom we would not be able to do a lot of the things that we do. Okay, so Margaret, I think it's back to you.
Okay, so some of the activities, Earthquake Country Alliance, this thing has a mind of its own.
Margaret, let me go ahead and control the slide because
I'm not.
Thank you.
I'm not touching it.
I know. Let me go ahead and control it for you because I think it was going too quickly.
I think it has a mind of its own.
I'll get.
Yeah, I wasn't touching it either.
All right, continue.
Next slide up. Okay, so our Earthquake Country Alliance SoCal activities, we have many. Again, we've been in existence for a while. We have a statewide committee that, and we have our local committees. So our local committees, we do have, we'll talk about that in a minute, but we have our media bureau, we have our participation bureau, we have our membership bureau, we do speaking here locally, and these are also statewide committees. So with those, your chairs here in Southern California is Connie Lackey. She is with Providence Health Services, not with us today, and we do want to say hello to Connie because Connie is very active working with Providence St. Joseph's Hospital right now, and that's where we want her to be. But Connie is one of our committee chairs. Heidi and myself are chairing the Southern California. We also have our regional workshops. So what you're attending today is one of our regional workshops. We have those quarterly. Normally, we try to have those in different areas of Southern California, so it will accommodate everybody that they don't have to drive too far at least once a year. Right now, in the new world, of course, we're doing these on Zoom, and maybe we may go to more workshops on Zoom after this and kind of working through this and see how it works. So we may start doing some more workshops on Zoom. Once we can be face-to-face, we do want to also continue those because it's an important part with Earthquake Country Alliance is our networking. Being able to meet other people in our field, being able to share ideas, and that's a very important part of our workshops. So we will, as soon as we can and be safe, get back to doing some of those, but also keeping some of these Zoom workshops as well. We also invite you to email us, let us know some of the topics that you are interested in. Last year we did a training with our healthcare partners on how to create an earthquake or a drill, and we hope to do that again this year. But let us know some of the things that you want to have more information about, and we'll include that into our workshops. And then, of course, we support the Great Shakeout. We created the Great Shakeout back in 2008. That was created by the Earthquake Country Alliance. And so we participate, we encourage, and we do media events. We send the media to highlight many of the events across our actually California and the Pacific Northwest and the United States as to highlighting many of the shakeout events that are going on, so that people can then take that information, share it, bring it back to their organization. Mark is also going to tell you about all the resources we have available for you to do your own shakeout. And of course, that is something to think about. What is shakeout in 2020 and 2021 going to look like? It may be different this year. And so that's something we will be thinking about as well.
So we do have a different coordinating committees that are working on many things, and we have the list that are up there. And you can see there's a broad level of participation, and including I think one of our newer additions is Sherry Blankenship from Cal OES, who is a senior emergency services coordinator, and we invite you to get in touch with some of our coordinators for some of our committees, and if it's something that you have an expertise or an interest in, to get involved in some of the things that we're doing and bring your energy and your blood and your ideas to what we're doing. Back to you, Margaret.
Okay, and so one of the projects that we have, and I think I didn't mention that we also support our Tsunami Week. And so in March, and that kind of got waylaid this year with COVID, but March is a Tsunami Month. And so we support some tsunami events that go on across the country. Of course, Pacific Northwest being vulnerable for tsunami, so we also support that. And then we have a lot of our statewide committees. So our mini awards. We this year, for the last 4 years, have been able to support mini awards. And so we are allowed to give up to $500 to support some of your projects that you will have, to be able to then give you money to be able to do some of these projects. So this year, the winners of our 2020 ECA SoCal Mini Awards are on the list that you're seeing right now. These people will be invited to our next quarterly meeting to actually give an overview of what they accomplished with that money and were able to do, so that you can share in some of what they've done and then take it back to your organization as well. So some of those are our Ridgecrest CERT group, our St. Andrews Bungalows HOA, our Palm Desert Charter Middle School is doing SOS Secure Your School. This is a project that you can go to. ECA has a marketplace where you can actually purchase some of those products to go and secure your schools. Bakersfield Parent Nursery for Preparedness, our Colby Regency HOA, Rim of the World School District Laguna Beach CERT, Westminster Police Department, Morongo Basin Community Organizations is going to be doing a Help Yourself with Your Neighbors, Watts Healthcare Spring Knolls Emergency Response SCIRT, Naples Improvement Association, and Mark, next slide. So these are just a few of the people that have received the mini awards for 2020, and we look forward to many of you applying for this for next year.
Okay, one of the things that you did when you registered was we asked you how might, some questions on how the COVID situation might affect your response in a damaging earthquake. Some of these questions will be the ideas will be included in some of the presentations today, but these are a sample of some of the, on your screen are some of the responses that we got back. And a lot of people were concerned with challenges with social distancing and the standard things about communications and so forth. the specialty pharmacy issue is one that actually comes under a lot of the kinds of work that I do. And the issue with the CERT teams being able to deal with how they're going to do their job, and AFN, access and functional need residents, and so forth. Those are some of the things that will be dealt with. I know Jenny's will be dealing with a lot of them. The answers to these questions on how the community and on ones will be included in the capture that you will have access to, so you'll be able to see the answers into. But one of them that's very interesting is that a lot of the volunteers are in the high risk range. So what items changed? A lot of you were concerned about personal preparedness information, and that's something clearly that we're going to have to start looking at adding to our kits and to our map your neighborhoods and our CERT team types of things. The issue of opportunity to refresh, emergency, and consume all, those are the kinds of things that we would regularly talk about in some of our workshops and so forth going forward. Government services were found to be amongst the most important. Interesting that a lot of people thought that they didn't miss any closed services. That would certainly change in an earthquake. So you can see that there's a lot of things. A lot of people thought that Governor Newsom has been doing a great job, and this will change from disaster to disaster depending on how the disaster is going. Infrastructure is obviously very different in an earthquake, so how we view that may be different as well. So those are some of the things we have to look at in terms of what's the difference between COVID and what's the difference between an earthquake. What are the changes to your personal organization planning? This is going to be very important. In terms of what you're going to do, in terms of the differences and the similarities, the PPEs, the communication is always an issue. But I think it's very important that we get to thinking about what we need to do both from the pandemic and then taking that step to what if an earthquake happens, or what if an earthquake happens during a pandemic. So those will be included.
Okay, and one last thing for the resources, all of the links that you're going to see in these presentations, at the end of presentations, there'll be resources. All of those are being put into a website. Mark will talk more about that at the end of this meeting, or towards the end, that there will be a website that you can get all of these resources from. So you don't have to scramble to write them all down quickly or take a Photoshop shoot of it. They will be on a website that we will lead you to at the end of the meeting.
Mark, is Jenny
before we continue, I just want to acknowledge that there are a couple comments in the chat about sound issues, and you can control your sound at the lower left where you see the microphone. There's an arrow next to that you may be able to select a different audio output source. Or select a speaker, it will say, and you can select the speaker, and that might solve your issue. And then we'll continue. Sorry about that. And also, a lot of people are asking about recording of the webinar. It will be available. You'll see the link to the webpage about the webinar. That's where it will be available, hopefully by later this afternoon or by tomorrow. We will be emailing out also the link to that so that you will have that. To be able to come and watch the webinar or share it with others.
One other question that came up is another acronym, PPE, and that one's been thrown around the news. That's personal protective equipment, and that's the gloves, the masks, the gowns, the kinds of things that we're seeing the frontline responders using to keep themselves protected from and not spreading the COVID virus or any other type of infectious situation, whether it was COVID or something else. So Mark, is Jenny ready?
Yeah.
Yes, she is. Go ahead.
Okay, welcome aboard, Jenny. It is my distinct pleasure to be able to introduce Jenny Novak, who is an award-winning certified emergency manager. She specializes in earthquake preparedness, exercise development, and response to recovery transition. She's currently working with the Emergency Services Coordinator for the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. Before that, she was responsible for the Comprehensive Emergency Management Program at Cal State University Northridge. And over the past, I'm not going to say how many years, but let's just say she has a lot of experience, that she has served 2 municipalities and 1 large public university, one country in the fields of 1 county. Sorry, I need to get my glasses adjusted. 1 county in the field of emergency management and fire prevention. So she has a wide base and wide view of experience. She currently serves as the workshop coordinator for the Earthquake Country Alliance and for Southern California. We are delighted to have her. Jenny Novak will be providing the presentation on responding to an earthquake in the COVID-19 era. Jenny, it's all yours.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar. So I'm going to be speaking today about responding to an earthquake, or really, other disasters too. I'm also going to consider a tsunami a little bit, since that's the primary focus of this group during the pandemic era, which is something that we haven't really had experience. And I want to preface it by saying that I'm not an expert at doing that, because I don't think anyone really is. And my talk is going to probably or potentially bring up more questions than solutions for some of these types of functions that we're going to be considering. But hopefully at the end of this talk, my goal is that you're going to have some ideas for things to consider in your planning efforts, at least, and how COVID-19 might impact the response and a little bit of recovery for an earthquake, should we have one during the pandemic era. So let me get in here. Okay, that's so multiple concurrent incidents, that's something that we have already talked about a little bit this morning in the intro. There's certainly instances of this happening. Mark mentioned the dam breaking and flooding in Michigan that is happening currently. We had tornadoes earlier this year in April. 100 people, and that was during the pandemic era. There's been a lot of different instances of multiple disasters that have made situations in response a lot more complex, including November 8th, 2018, which is a date that we'll always remember in California emergency management, where we had 2 wildfires and a mass shooting in Ventura County within 24 hours, and the Camp Fire started that day in NorCal. We had 5 wildfires happening at the same time in the SoCal in December 2017. In September 17, 2 Category 5 hurricanes within 10 days in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So there's certainly instances of this happening. Sometimes when we talk about planning, it seems like, well, this might be too extreme of a scenario, but it isn't, because we can see that it has happened before. And that is something more and more that we need to start thinking about, is how a second disaster might influence our planning and our response to the original disaster. So, let's see, slide. Earthquake impacts. So pandemic, and take it back and think about how will earthquakes potentially throw a wrench in that. So disruption to communications is obviously one thing. So we're already isolated in terms of physical distancing, but we would be more isolated in terms of our communications. A lot of us have been relying heavily on phones and internet to keep in touch, TV, news broadcasts to know what's going on, but that could be disrupted in an earthquake. Debris and hazards blocking the roadways. Fortunately, the pandemic isn't causing that right now. With the geographic separation that we currently don't have to deal with. Supply chain interruptions, while we've had some slowness on the PPE, the personal protective equipment, we haven't had much of a problem with lack of food, water, or other critical supplies in this pandemic. So that would be something that an earthquake would definitely throw a wrench in. Building damages, because it's a pandemic and it's a biological hazard, we aren't seeing the damages and the debris that a typical disaster, a physical disaster, normally brings. So we would see that in an earthquake, and we would need to thinking about sheltering outside of the home, which is, kind of flipping on its head the current stay-at-home philosophy. And then also our mental anxiety. Everybody's already a little bit, out of sorts because of the pandemic. It's affecting some people more than others, but a lot of people have been sad or depressed or felt lonely because of this. And an earthquake would certainly add to that kind of anxiety during the pandemic. So in terms of emergency management, I want to kind of, as was mentioned earlier, try to see some of the positives. And in terms of emergency management, we have kind of some pros that in place already. We have this massive organizational structure. So the State Operations Center has been activated for a long time, I think 2 months now, at the highest level. And there is already an organizational structure in place. It's actually a very similar structure to what we had discussed when we were doing the Southern California Catastrophic Earthquake Plan update these past couple of years. So this is actually, this instance has allowed us to sort of test out that organizational structure. So we have people filling all those seats up at headquarters in Sacramento. That has been going on. So that's not something, in a typical earthquake or emergency, we'd have to start that from scratch. We'd have to activate, we'd have to call people in. But in this case, it's already happening. It's already in cities and counties across the area. We already have that structure in place. As I mentioned, staffing patterns already have been created, so people are already filling those seats. A resource request process has been well established, and that is something that is really critical and has been difficult to get up and running in different disasters. So we already have that. It's running like a well-oiled machine. We have a multi-agency coordination group for scarce resources already established. We have state of emergency already critical for getting things purchased quickly in an emergency. Food distribution is already taking place at a lot of our food banks, so that would be something that an earthquake would also probably yield as a consequence. So that's already happening, so we just need to increase those efforts. And then hospital surge plans have already been activated, so we already have bed spaces available. It's not something that we'd have to ramp up during the earthquake if one were to occur. So it went backwards. Let's see. In terms of the cons, emergency operations centers have been active for months. So there is operational costs going through the roof in terms of to local governments, staff fatigue potentially because that's wrong. In this case, some emergency operations centers are running virtually, and obviously that could be interrupted if an earthquake happened. Sheltering or staging sites already in use for COVID-19 testing. So those facilities that we might normally use for earthquake response might not be available because COVID has already claimed those resources. And then, the new missions that would come up that would really be a critical priority would really push our systems to their limits, I think, because we already are kind of stretched thin in some ways. And I already sort of mentioned that supply chains would be interrupted, and that's going to make everything worse in terms of the lack of availability of PPE, disinfectant. Right now we are able to move that stuff around, but in an earthquake, we probably not least, we'd have to be looking at alternative options for that. So key messaging for protective actions, I think this is really important, and I want to make sure that, that these things do not really change. Yes, we are responding to a pandemic, but in terms of an earthquake, you still want to take those same protective measures. So drop, cover, and hold on. It doesn't change because of the pandemic. The tsunami protective actions also do not change. If you are near the coast when a major earthquake happens, evacuate, get to higher ground, or go inland. So, safe at home applies to the pandemic, but it does not necessarily supersede other emergencies. So you may be safer at home unless there's a wildfire or a tsunami, something that you would normally want to evacuate for if those situations were to occur, but definitely take your same actions for an earthquake. Okay, let's see. So volunteer acts and resources. So a lot of you are involved in volunteer organizations, so you're probably already familiar with the ways that some of these have occurred. So there are fewer senior citizens available to volunteer for in-person activities. That's certainly something that we've seen. Our regular in-person monthly meetings can no longer happen, so we've had to struggle sometimes to find a virtual substitute for that. There's need probably more so than ever. We need help with food bank distribution, well checks, meal delivery, shelter assistance. All these things are happening at once, but there's fewer volunteers available. In terms of training and onboarding, typically a lot of that's done in person, sometimes with a background check, which might be impacted by whether or not the courthouses are open. All that stuff is canceled or delayed. So that's very difficult for volunteers. But on the pro side of things, in terms of volunteer impacts, we have established a program statewide, Californians for All, which is an opportunity for sign up if they help. A lot of people have a little bit more time available right now because of unemployment or school closures. So people can sign up through this website, and then the state will connect them with needs in local communities to fill gaps. California Health Corps is a volunteer program for doctors and nurses and EMTs. Anyone with medical certifications can help that way. There's also a lot of virtual opportunities that are in place that people can help with: 211 calls, well checks that can be done virtually, mental health help on some of the suicide prevention hotlines. So you can see there's kind of pros and cons in terms of volunteer impacts because there are some resources available. Sheltering impacts. So of course, this is something that comes to mind in a pandemic. You don't necessarily want to get everybody together in the same room sheltering. The American Red Cross National Headquarters has developed some guidelines for sheltering in a pandemic. The California Department of Social Services has also developed a framework that I just saw a draft of yesterday that should be finalized later this week. In terms of sheltering, though, there are a lot of considerations. Health screening is something that you would need to do in a congregate shelter. Obviously, social distancing. So as the photo you can see there, that would not be something that we could do having the cots that close together. I have seen in the Red Cross plan, they're looking at 110 square feet per client, which is a lot. I have also seen that they really want to limit congregate shelters to 50 or fewer. You would also have to have a testing and isolation plan in place, lots of disinfecting and hand washing in place. So there's a lot of concerns with the state of California is, and the Red Cross too, would prefer to go with non-congregate options first. So some things that might work: trailers and RVs. That's something that could keep people apart if they have that resource. The state did provide some trailers to local governments for COVID-19 isolation. That's mostly supposed to be for people impacted by homelessness if they need isolation and they don't have a home to go to. But that might be able to be repurposed were an earthquake to occur. Vehicles. The plan that I saw involved a temporary evacuation point where people could come with vehicles and still stay that way because they're in their own cars, checking in with the people managing the shelter to see where they could get redirected. Hotels, Project Room Key is something that's ongoing. That's also a program to support people experiencing homelessness in terms of isolation, but hotels would definitely be something that they would look into first. And they're recommending that local governments have agreements with hotels in place if an earthquake or wildfire or something else happened where we'd have to do sheltering. Hotels is the #1 thing that the CDFS is recommending. Dormitories, another option with local colleges. If college isn't in session, like a lot of them are not doing in-person sessions, this might be, and also outdoor options. There are a lot of campgrounds that potentially people could use in an earthquake if you had to leave your home. Campgrounds, either with a RV or trailer or with tent camping, might be an option. So there's a lot of things that we traditionally wouldn't explore that are being thought about and explored right now in terms of if we needed to evacuate people.
Hi, Jenny, this is Mark. I just want to let you know, I'm going to stop your video at the great suggestion of one of our attendees that it may help with some of the bandwidth issues that are happening where your sound is breaking up.
Okay.
Just want to let you know that.
Yeah, no problem.
We won't be seeing you anymore.
Okay, hopefully everybody can hear me a little better if that helps. I try to get as close to my router as I can, but I don't know how well that works. So some of the disproportionate impacts that I do want to bring up just as we are planning for any subsequent disaster, to keep in mind that people are experiencing the impacts of COVID-19 in different ways are having a harder time than high income populations. If you don't have financial savings in place, this can be a really difficult time if you're getting unemployed right now, or if your hours have been cut, such as service industry workers. I know a lot of friends personally out of work that were, you know, bartenders or worked at hotels with conferences, supporting those kinds of things. A lot of people are out of work, and that is impacting people in a disproportionate way. DAFN populations, definitely, you know, it's going to be harder on those, and I think a little bit later. Chronically and terminally ill also, you know, if you're already feeling sick, if you're already having a compromised immune system, certainly you don't want to introduce another virus to the mix. So those are also, those populations are also going to have a more difficult time with procuring groceries and other supplies that most of us feel comfortable taking the risk. Institutionalized settings, certainly that is a way that we're seeing the virus spread very, very quickly and rapidly. Those are a lot of the cases in most of the counties happening either at like a jail situation or a skilled nursing facility where everybody's close together. As everyone knows, senior citizens are a little bit more vulnerable to this, proven that they tend to have a higher mortality rate than others. So they, of course, are also nervous about this. I mentioned a few resources for people experiencing homelessness. They, of course, cannot really isolate very well unless the state has helped with these programs. People of color, there have been studies showing that people of color are experiencing the virus at a higher rate of color. So these are all things that we need to consider if another disaster happened, these people are already disadvantaged in a way. So that is an important planning consideration. So in terms of how it impacts individual or family preparedness plans, a good thing, and I think this was also mentioned in some of the answers to the questions, is that many families are not currently separated by work and school. So that's good. I think somebody had put in there would be less of a need for search and rescue in some of the commercial buildings. Yeah. You know, we always talk about the big one potentially happening while people are at work, and then you have to get reunited with other family members. And right now, most people are actually at home. So that could be a good thing. A lot of people working on plans right now, things that the COVID outbreak has brought up, things that you might want to do. Of course, securing your space in advance is going to make your home the safest shelter. And that really is more critical, I'd say, now than ever, is that you want your home to continue to be the safest place, because we discussed just recently all those sheltering options, and none of them are really great. Like, you don't want to have to be going to a shelter at this time. So it's really important to try to perform some of that non-structural mitigation. How can you have more time available since you're not commuting to try to do that? Considering a generator in case of power disruption. We see how critical the electricity is right now, I think, because we are at home all the time. You know, we are communicating virtually, and we're needing air conditioning, some of us, as it starts to get hotter. So thinking about power disruption as a really a bad thing that could happen to make the situation a lot worse. So try to mitigate that in advance. And then, of course, sheltering, as we talked about, if there is a family or a friend that's nearby that you might be able to stay with, that's really something you might want to think about up front. Maybe somebody that doesn't have risk of exposure, that's something people want to consider in their plans. I talked a little bit about outdoor options for sheltering. I think a lot of us have camping kits, thinking about getting that prepared and getting that ready for worst case scenario. That is something to consider. Fortunately, in SoCal, we have pretty decent weather, and it's not as big of a concern as in some other areas where they get really extreme heat or cold. And then, of course, as we discussed, enhancing the financial emergency plan. I think a lot of people have lesson from this is not having enough in savings to get through a difficult time like this, especially this prolonged pandemic disaster that is having huge impact on the stock markets, huge impacts on employment. So that's a really important piece that people probably want to consider now more so than ever. In terms of the kits, I think that we had some good answers that were shared earlier. One positive about the preparedness kit is that right now people have stockpiled a little bit more supplies than they might normally, because people actually did start to see that they needed to have supplies maybe at home that they didn't have in place. So we did see that, where people went and got additional supplies, and hopefully, people will think about this as a continued preparedness measure. They don't want to be caught off guard again in the future. They don't want to have to go to the store and wait in a really long line to get those essentials. So the importance of a kit has really been understood, I think, for a lot of people that didn't normally think about that. Of course, new considerations, additional masks, gloves, other personal protective gear. That's such a shortage everywhere that I think those of us that did have that in our preparedness kits really feel fortunate. And that's something you really want to make sure maybe you didn't think it was as important when you were preparing before, but now you see it so critical. And if you can, still in short supply, but hand sanitizer, disinfecting supplies, those things I think some of us had in our kits, but again, maybe wasn't top of the list, but we see that that can be really, really important for disaster situations. So how to better prepare your organization. This is a good time to think about what things are going to look like when the pandemic starts to die down a little bit, if it does, or we just move forward with our reopening plans. It's really a good idea to conduct a tabletop discussion exercise about what actions that you might take if another disaster were to happen, earthquake, tsunami, wildfire, anything like that. How would your normal plan be different because of the pandemic? And then update your plan based on that discussion. You plan to incorporate the rules for social distancing, what kinds of virtual coordination tools you might need to use, disinfecting, hand washing, PPE. One of the things that public health has been talking about is as we're reopening, especially larger organizations like schools, you have to have a testing plan in place. If there was a positive in your organization, how are you going to make sure that everyone gets tested? How are you going to trace those contacts? That's something that you want to discuss within your organization. So that's kind of wrapping up my talk. When I was putting this together, I came across quite a few really great resources that we're going to link to on the website. California's COVID website, of course, I think most of your local counties, I didn't list them all out here, have their own COVID-19 information websites. Even some cities do. Now more than ever, I think is really important to get dialed into your local emergency notification systems and spread the word about that, because I do COVID-19 updates through my local emergency notification system. Just even, for example, street sweeping, whether or not we're going to get tickets for leaving our cars on the street. The city had lifted that for about a month, but they just got back in place to get tickets. So I'm getting those notices through that system, and that is a really important thing. If there was another disaster, it's a very quick way to find official information. So, and then also these are just some other resources for people that have been thinking and writing about this topic already. Great article in The Atlantic. Lori Dangler, who helps with the ECA branch up in the North Coast, wrote an article this weekend. There is a working group looking at earthquakes and other geohazards in time of pandemic. Our friend Bob DeGroot is involved in that. And then an article by one of our member groups, the Coachella Valley Disaster Preparedness Network. There's a great video showing the new Red Cross standards for sheltering in COVID-19. I encourage you to check that out. And FEMA also put together an exercise starter kit on how you can get some of your operations back up and running. So doing a tabletop exercise, that would be a really great way to do that. So I think that is bringing to, I don't know. Okay, I don't think I can advance the slides anymore, it looks like. So
that's fine. We have a couple questions for you.
Okay.
Okay, so Robert West is asking, what is the typical evaluation time for bridge clearance post an earthquake?
Okay, well, I don't know if there's really a typical time in place. I think it's going to depend on the earthquake itself and how many impacts it has. but I do know that Cal, anyway, as a state employee, has a system in place where, based on the earthquake, as soon as it happens, there is a model that goes into the geographic database and shows all the bridges that they have an eye on for monitoring, and sort of projects whether or not that bridge would have survived that earthquake based on its construction. So they've got a really great database with that, and that is a system that's going to help them pinpoint which ones they need to go and take a look at first. So that's through Caltrans. But of course, you know, I mean, it depends on, you do know that that information is pretty immediate, that they will be receiving at least the headquarters level. And then of course it would take some time to get the message out to the district office and to get actual boots on the ground to go and evaluate those bridges. But I do know that it is definitely a priority in terms of our earthquake plan, and that they do have that system in place. So I hope that helps at least to give you an idea of the process.
Thank you. Steve is asking, wouldn't hotels and dorms be vulnerable to earthquake hazards in an affected area? Would authorities need to evacuate the population to non-earthquake affected areas?
So it's a good question. I think that in California, we have really great building standards, especially in buildings that have been built recently. So in the last 20 years, I mean, really anything that was built after, I think it was the 70s, when building codes were really, the San Fernando earthquake that happened here, building codes really became enhanced here. So I think that if construction was recent enough, hopefully these buildings would be able to withstand most earthquakes that we have here. It's hard to envision a situation where every building would just be completely destroyed from an earthquake, because we know this hazard exists and it is a threat in this area. We have been building to really high standards for new construction. So I do think that before we move people into hotels or dorms, that they would have to have an evaluation by a building inspector to make sure that those facilities were still inhabitable. And it, of course, would be difficult with aftershocks to continue to have to assess that. But that is what we look at with an earthquake. And we do know that some people might want to leave the area, but I don't think that it'd be a necessity based on every building being completely destroyed.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question is, with people on alternating schedules, how do you recommend keeping track of who is on site at work in case of an earthquake, to keep track of people who is counted after an earthquake?
Yeah, I think that is really a good point in terms of a planning consideration, because yes, I think that as we move back toward normal operations, we're going to start having, you know, half the staff in on some days, half on another day, and that will become more difficult. So I would encourage people to try to come up with virtual check-ins and systems like that. However, obviously the earthquake can disrupt those type of systems. So anything where you may be able to have everybody kind of in virtual, but then also be able to have kind of a hard copy of that roster downloaded to a device might also be a good option, because yeah, I think that would certainly be a challenge. Our normal protocols might not work for that in terms of you know, knowing everybody's supposed to be in the office on a certain day. So yeah, definitely let's add that one to the list for discussions and tabletop exercises.
Okay, we'll move on now. And I just want to say again, we're still getting a lot of questions about the recording and links and other aspects of that. There will be, everything's going to be posted to our website, and you'll see the link to that soon. And it's been posted in the Q&A. So, and we'll also be emailing that out to you. So all of these links are already on the website. You'll see that link coming up shortly. And now we'll move on to Heidi Rosofsky. We're running a little bit behind, so we want to continue there. Heidi, I'm going to go ahead and control the slides. So you just say next, and we'll keep moving. I'm going to keep your video off just to keep the issue we're having from moving.
No problem.
Okay.
You're on.
And I want to say thank you to Jenny, and understanding the needs and feeling comfortable working with people with access and functional needs is important for neighbors helping neighbors. So to help us to understand more about that, we have teachable moments that are being presented to us by Heidi Rosofsky. Heidi has been involved in emergency management for more than 40 years. Upon receiving a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis, Heidi turned her focus to improving the ability of all levels of emergency management to meet the needs of community members who need assistance or accommodations to receive, understand, and act upon emergency information before, during, and after a disaster. She is currently with the Global Visions Consortium as their senior consultant for inclusive planning. She is the national coordinator for the Abilities Expo Emergency Preparedness Initiative and a member of the Earthquake Country Alliance Senior and People with Disabilities Committee and a co-chair for the Earthquake Country Alliance Southern California region. Heidi?
Hi, everybody. So you've heard a little bit about who we are and some of the, a little bit in Jenny's presentation. So who are the people that come under this magical word, you know, disabilities, access, and functional needs that a lot of people do not understand? The public does not relate to that word. It's kind of an internal emergency management world. So our audience are people with disabilities, which is like 1 in 5, seniors. In institutional settings, we've seen the effect of COVID with that, and you can read the list that's there, some of which you may not have considered. Next. Mark, next. So basically what you need to remember that we're looking at anyone who is going to need some kind of an accommodation or assistance. And access and functional needs does not have to be anyone who has a disability or anything like that. It's just anyone who requires some kind of physical or programmatic, you know, access to be able to ensure that they can have the ability to respond, the ability to receive, the ability to keep themselves safe, just like anyone else. Next. Mark, thank you. One of the things within the disability community, because of the fight for ADA, is nothing about us without us. And this is true for any group that we're working with. It needs to be a group, the stakeholders need to be involved. We need to work together in order to be able to come up with messages that are specific and relevant to the audience that we are working with. And they must be reviewed and revised by that group, because there have been too many times that we have had, there have been suggestions or there have been information that's been presented and the assumptions that have been built in are not actually useful and are not accurate for whom we've needed to go, whom we've really wanted to be working with. Next. COVID has helped us in this way. As you see, the gentleman is standing before a situation where the shelves are bare, but what we need to do is to be able to use that as a jump point, to be able to help people get to the next place of what else they need to put in their kits, the things they need to do about rotating them. So COVID can be a positive teachable moment. It doesn't all have to be negative. And that's what we need to do, is find that meat that we can do to say, you've taken this step, now take the next. And Mark, that's next. So personal planning, and within the access and functional needs audiences, preparedness is the key to maintaining independence. So that's what we want to work with, is finding those things that help individuals maintain their independence. You know, Jenny talked about the trying to stay at home, and at home being the best place, you know, to be in the COVID world. It's also, if possible, the best place to be for someone who has already had it set up for their maintaining their independence as well. So that's what we're trying to do. Okay, next. Neighbor helping neighbor is really another situation that we need to really look at. In my own particular situation, I'm actually at a very high risk because I not only have MS, but I have an immune suppressive issue. So what did I do? I built my own little support network out of some folks that I know. And so I have some people that will go hit the Costco for me most of the time, and this, and that, and the other. And a lot of neighbors have come together to help the folks on their block that they know maybe older or have an issue already. That's what we need to start harnessing and making it more concrete, and to make it more of a situation that we build that out to be able to be multi-hazard, to be able to work in an earthquake. What the main difference between COVID and in an earthquake is now we can go down to the Costco or the grocery store, and even though there may be supplies out, the supply chain is still reasonably intact. After a disaster, that supply chain is not likely to be anywhere near as intact as it is now. And then the ability to get to those places because of potential road damage or other things, debris in the roads, that kind of thing, is going to make it also more difficult. So the ability to move it into the neighborhood and to be able to pull what you need from your kits, to work it from something smaller, from in that case is necessary. So from that neighborhood, we need to come down to a personal support team, which can be part of a CERT team or can be part of a Map Your Neighborhood, where folks are actually assigned to go help someone who has an access and functional need. We want at least 3 people. Why? Because if you only have one, that's the one who's out of town when this happens. They need to know how to help someone specifically, not making assumptions. This is a team that works together, trains together. They know how to assist, they know the supplies, they know what to do, and they plan, practice, and work together. Next. They know the earthquake safety actions. They learn them together. They work together. The expression is, if you can't get back up, don't get down. Earthquake Country Alliance has put together some things to do if you can't get under a desk or get back up and out. So we have the drop, cover, and hold. We have things on what to do, where you can find that information. Practicing is certainly key. Instructing others how to assist you. But one of the things is that the key issue too is you need, again, someone to check on you in that personal support team. Because if you've gotten into a situation where you've protected yourself, but there's debris around you, you may not be able to get out of your house or whatever it is without someone helping you get out. So you may have done the right thing, but step 2 may be part of what you need help with. So those actions and these know your safety actions are also part of the resources that we have on the resources for Earthquake Country Alliance. We also have a wide variety of wonderful pieces that are meant for the disability access and functional needs audience. There's an 8-page guide that really goes into some very specific and meaty recommendations that are relevant and specific for different types of disabilities. We have a video that is for mobility disabilities that the people that are showing the actions actually have disabilities. So it was done by people with disabilities, for people with disabilities. We're working with seniors who do not necessarily identify with the disability community on getting appropriate messaging for them. Language guidelines for inclusive emergency management is a FEMA document that helps you understand, particularly for the disability community, which is its own culture, like any other culture, that you need to understand that culture and how best to approach them respectfully. And remember that a lot of these, the age and disability and things of that nature, income and so forth, crosses all color and racial lines, racial and cultural lines. So we need to understand all cultural bases from that aspect, and make sure that we include our ability to provide messaging in a culturally correct context, so that it is accepted by the people that we are trying to get those messages to. So those resources are available, will be available on the resource page that you have. And I touched a little bit on the Map Your Neighborhood and the CERT team type of situation. And to tell you just a brief bit about it is Margaret Vinci, who is my co-chair partner. And as we said, Margaret has served as the manager of the Office of the Earthquake Programs at Caltech since 1973. She's the coordinator of the Southern California Regional Shake Alert Earthquake Early Warning Program. And along with being one of my SoCal co-chair partners, Margaret has the distinction of being one of the Earthquake Country Alliance and Shakeout founding partners. She serves as Pasadena's Map Your Neighborhood coordinator and remains fiercely devoted to increasing business and community emergency preparedness and resilience. I give you Margaret.
Thank you, Heidi. And so this is going to be a brief overview of our Map Your Neighborhood program. You've heard much about that today. You've also heard about it, all about survivability in a disaster. It is going to be neighbor helping neighbor. To be able to survive. We all know that our first responder in a disaster is going to be the person next to you, but how do you get to know that person next to you when you need it? And that is what the Map Your Neighborhood program is. It is a plan that helps you to get to know your neighbors ahead of time to be able to then survive any disaster. And so first of all, you get to know your neighbors, you make a plan with your neighbors. So this is going to be specific to your neighborhood to have a plan. And the key to Map Your Neighborhood is actually working it out with your neighbors. Not one person having the plan and keeping it to themselves and directing everybody, but everybody in that neighborhood creating that plan together and being a part of that plan. And that is how the Map Your Neighborhood works. You will see the acronym MYN. I will use that to shorten my presentation. It represents a Map Your Neighborhood. And so Map Your Neighborhood fills the gap between you and the community and the emergency responders. What do you do in the meantime? So it is divided up into different projects. So first you will recruit leaders in your group. So one block captain is going to take the lead, organize the neighborhood to begin with, define your neighborhood. Neighborhood is between 18 and 22 households because you need to get to each household within the first hour and to be able to help with people. You're then going to scout the area, look for assets, look for risks in the neighborhood. You're going to create or identify a meeting place. So in that disaster, after you have checked your own household, you then need to go to a meeting place. So with Map Your Neighborhood, it is a plan so that after that disaster, you stand on your front porch and you say, now what do I do? And this is a plan that helps you to develop what are you going to do after that. Next slide. And so within the 9 steps to Map Your Neighborhood, and the training for this takes about 90 minutes. And in that 90 minutes, you will then learn how to, first of all, what do you do immediately after that earthquake? We are a multi-hazard state. We are in COVID right now. Many people are using the Map Your Neighborhood plan for COVID. But in an earthquake, what do you need to do after that earthquake hits? The first 6 steps are part of the Map Your Neighborhood program. You're going to, first of all, dress for safety, put on your helmet. You're going to put on your hard hat, your gloves, your sturdy shoes, and always dress for safety. You need to take care of yourselves first. Check for injuries in your household, check for leaking gas, turn off the water, put a help and okay sign in the window, and then you go to your meeting place. And that is the first 6 steps as to what you do after an earthquake. And then within your plan for Map Your Neighborhood, you're going to already form teams. And those teams will then, you'll go to your gathering spot, and then the teams will go out to each household. They will then check for leaking gas. They will turn off the water. They will bring anybody that has special needs. You'll get to know your neighbors, get to know who the needs are, who has animals. So if you're stuck at work, somebody can then be able to feed your animals, taking care of small children, knowing the elderly, who needs to help bringing them to the gathering spot. And so those teams will go out, do their job, and then everybody will survive together in a meeting place. With COVID, that might be a little bit different. You might have to have distancing, but that's okay. That's being actually done today. Next slide. And so actually in the coronavirus, many of our Map Your Neighborhood teams, I've been in contact with those in Pasadena. Many of our Map Your Neighborhood teams are actually working their plan. So they have been connecting with their neighbors. They may not be able to go door to door and check on them, but they have been calling them, they've been texting them, keeping in daily contact with their neighbors, getting to know the neighbors a lot better. I've seen some Map Your Neighbor neighborhoods being able to put out lawn chairs in front of their house, and then they can talk to the neighbor that is next door. And so at a happy hour, being able to do that. Picking up groceries or prescriptions or running errands for some of the people in the neighborhoods that maybe are too fearful to go out because of their age or because of different risks, and being able to run those errands. This has been an issue with one of the limitations with the coronavirus is our volunteers. Many of the volunteers themselves are elderly, maybe they have certain medical risks, and so that is a limitation, but many of our neighborhoods are working through that. They have discovered secondary plans, bringing in maybe even some of their friends to be able to help out as well. And so these are some of the things that our Map Your Neighborhood are doing now and communicating with our neighbors. These are some of the resources. So where do you go to learn about Map Your Neighborhood? We actually will be planning a training here at Earthquake Country Alliance. Please let us know if you are interested in that 90-minute training so that you can become the advocate in your neighborhood, bring it back to your neighborhood. We will also help you to create the resources, the invitation that you will need to invite people to the neighborhood, help you walk the neighborhood, help you invite the neighbors, walk you through that. But these are some of the resources that you can go to find out more about that. And these again will be on our website. I would be remiss, because I am the Shake Alert Regional Coordinator, that in an earthquake we also need to know what to do. So know that we do now have the ability to provide a few seconds of warning when we have an impending earthquake. Depending on where you are, you will receive alert before, during, or after, depending on your location and distance from that earthquake zone. But we do now have the ability to provide that alert. So please go to and download one of the 3 apps that is now being tested for earthquake early warning. And one is MyShake. The other one is Quake Alert USA, and the third one is Shake Alert LA. Shake Alert LA is for LA County. You have to be in LA County to get that alert. And of course, you will get an alert if it meets the threshold, depending on where you are and the intensity of shaking for that. Shake Alert is for public alerting, but it also for automated operations to be able to open fire station doors, open elevators, slow down trains, being able to stop surgeries, things that can create to eliminate damage during that earthquake. So please go and download one of the apps to be able to get that alert for earthquake early warning. And so that's a brief overview that I wanted to then be able to provide, so that as you hear us talk about Map Your Neighborhood, you have an idea of what that is. And so let us know if you want more information and training, and we will be able to provide that to you. So I'm now going to turn everything over to our benefactor, our director,
Margaret,
to our founder of Earthquake
Margaret,
Country Alliance.
we have one question.
Yeah.
Andrew wants to know is there a train the trainer for Map Your Neighbor?
There is a train the trainer. I do the training here in Pasadena. With COVID, I had to cancel the last one, but we will, as soon as we can, have another training, looking at different options to have those online. So I might do a webinar online for that. But as soon as, if you can provide me with your information, then I will certainly let you know when we do have a training here. LA City also does Map Your Neighborhood. They have trainings. So as soon as COVID, we will let you know when those things are going on for the train the trainer. And so I'm going to turn this over to Mark.
Let me add on there, because the person who asked that question is actually joining us, looks like from Humboldt, at the northern end of the state. So let's say that locally there may be Map Your Neighborhood programs, so contact your local Office of Emergency Services to find out.
Yeah, and if they are not, this was created by the state of Washington. So you can go to their on the references there that I provided. You can go to the state of Washington. They have all the things, or you can call me. You can contact me. I will have Mark provide you with my contact information. I am happy to walk you through this program myself. There is videos online that you can do it, and I can help. I can provide you any of the digital documents that I have for Map Your Neighborhood.
And last question, Kimberly was asking, are the apps available on iOS and Android?
Yes, they are. Yes.
Thank you.
There are a few other questions that we'll come back to at the end. I'm going to just very quickly go through the slides I have for you this morning. The whole presentation and the recording, again, will be available for you to download and view by tomorrow. Some aspects are already on the website. You'll see that link coming up soon. A lot of the links that have been presented today. One of the things that we really want you to understand is that what you can do now, even when you're stuck at home, you're sheltering in place, or you're in this situation, there are some steps that you can take for your overall preparedness, and specifically for earthquake preparedness. And one of those really key things of the 7 steps to earthquake safety is what we call secure your space. And this is identifying things that might fall or fly at you, securing them so that they won't do so, to reduce injuries and damage. So you can secure your top heavy furniture, your TVs and electronics, your wall hangings. All of these types of ways to secure things are shown on the slides. Just for a matter of time, I'm not going to go in depth here, but you can see, and you can also view this in the PowerPoint itself and on our website at earthquakecountry.org/step1. Smaller items can be secured with putty and wax, that really quite effective for, at least in the, maybe not the biggest earthquakes, the largest shaking, but preventing these things from falling just because you bump them one day. Kitchen cabinets are really important to secure the top cabinets because they can prevent the big mess that you might have, in the broken glass you might have, and the loss of food and other things that you need after a disaster. And very importantly, to make sure that your gas appliances are secured to the walls so they don't break their gas connections and fall. You don't want to lose your water in your water heater, so securing that there will be very helpful for that purpose. So today, like right now, right after the webinar, you can move something that's heavy to a lower location and it won't fall and hurt you, even if the earthquake were to happen this afternoon. Go to the website earthquakecountry.org/step1 to see a variety of ways that you can secure a variety of types of objects in your home or workplace. Make a plan for doing that. These are items that you can order online to be delivered to you, so you can do that work. You can perhaps go to a home improvement store. They all have these types of straps and different types of ways that you can secure your space. We also will be sending out information about a special webinar on this topic planned for June 11th, where we will even have a live video of people taking these actions. So overall, the 7 steps to earthquake safety start with that. For earthquakes, you want to make sure you've secured things so you're not injured in the first place. Then you can put your plan into place that you've developed in advance, and know, of course, how to protect yourself during earthquakes, drop cover and hold on. All these resources are available on our website at earthquakecountry.org and in Spanish at terremotos.org. And of course, we are also the coordinator of Shakeout in California, and I'll talk about that in a second, but there are a lot of resources too that you can get from our website. earthquakecountry.org/staying-safe is a set of booklets that are in multiple languages online: English, Spanish, and Chinese. We also have 10 regional versions in English that you can find that have more custom information for example, in the SoCal region, SoCal Coast, Ventura, LA, and Orange County, Inland SoCal, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Imperial County, and for San Diego. And then there are other booklet versions for other parts of the state too. We do have sector-based committees that we encourage you all to be a part of. You can join us by emailing info@earthquakecountry.org if you'd like to contribute to the creation of resources for these different sectors, to outreach to these sectors, and we really would welcome your participation as part of being a member of ECA. One of those examples of that is what the Seniors and People with Disabilities Committee have created. As mentioned earlier, you can get these resources at earthquakecountry.org/disability. And also mention what to do during earthquakes. We have this graphic that you can share. We also have videos that go over what that information is and really show people what to do in different situations. Great shakeout will be happening this year. It will likely be different than it's been in many years because of the current situation at the time. And, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty of what we're all going to be dealing with still by October. But, you know, last year we had 10.8 million Californians. It was a record year participation. We're not expecting that this year because of the situation. But one of the goals we have is to really be encouraging more at-home drills. So organizations and schools have been having, you know, drills with their employees and students. That's what you do if the earthquake happens when you're at work or at school. Well, we want people to be practicing what to do at home as well. We spend more time out of work and school than we do at home. Normally, not right now, but how do we adapt the drills to where organizations can coordinate them in that way? So be looking for information about that. Here are those videos I mentioned to you that are available for what you can use to help educate people. That you can download these, you can link to these, share them on social media right now. Great way of making sure people are getting good safety information. So with that, do we have any questions for me directly? It looks like not, but we have other questions for our final Q&A. Gabby?
Sure. We have one question. I think it's a good question for the panel. With hundreds of thousands in apartments and condominiums, how would residents build resiliency during extended power outages, since generators are not authorized in these communities?
Jenny, is that maybe a question that you might have some insights on, or anyone?
Well, if Jenny doesn't, with the Map Your Neighborhood program, that we also include working with apartments, breaking them up into floors, so each floor works individually as a neighborhood. And of course, this again is going to be part of your supplies, knowing that elevators are not going to be working. Knowing the needs of people for evacuation and how you're going to get them out of that building with elevators not working, with the lack of electricity. This is going to be part of your planning. Being able to be able to have lighting is number one, so that you aren't in the dark. Being able to have solar ways of, so there's solar batteries, there's solar lights that you can get to put up, and being able to have those supplies. And electricity is probably the one thing. We did not see it in this disaster, so people didn't need to be buying water because water was being pumped to their house. And we had communication with this disaster. You're also not going to have that maybe with an earthquake. So you will be, your world will be your neighborhood, and being able to then have that neighborhood prepared for these things that you're not going to have available.
Basically, this is Heidi. Basically, one of the issues, the biggest question that I get asked regarding that has to do with refrigerated medication. And so one of the ways that, and I have a refrigerated medication, so my workaround is, and my medication comes with something that it actually tells me, you know, when it's, you know, near temperature. I leave it in the refrigerator till it starts getting too warm. I put it in the freezer until it starts getting to room temperature. And then if you get this small kind of like the lunch or the small style, what do they call them? That you can put, I can't think of the word. They keep things cold, and like that you can put a sandwich or a drink or something in, and you get the type of chemical ice packs from the drugstore. You can crack those and help keep things cold in those type of small containers that are meant to keep, you know, food cold or something that you know, if you take it with you for lunch or something like that. So if you get,
you're talking about like a soft-sided cooler of some sort.
Yes, yes, something like that. So you have that multiple step, and those chemical, you know, kind of ice packs that you break open for injuries are easily stored in an earthquake kit as a backup.
I see a question
Sure.
about the number 4, minimize financial hardship. I didn't touch on that. That is really where you're looking at, you know, what our greatest financial hardship if you're a homeowner might be damage to your house. So what can you do to retrofit your older home if it's especially built perhaps before 1980? You might be looking at what ways to improve it so we'll have less damage. Of course, securing your space will also prevent loss of valuables, but you can also consider earthquake insurance, and all of that information is listed at earthquakecountry.org/step4. So just go to our website to look for more about that. I also see a question about, in a childcare setting and in a rainy day, what are some recommendations for our teachers and students to do in a rainy day? I assume that means if an earthquake were to happen on a rainy day, just not general recommendations. And this is really where it's key to adapt your response plan, whether you might be moving outside because you want to make sure that your building is not damaged, or perhaps to do an assessment of everyone being okay, especially for a school. If it's a very rainy day and it doesn't seem like you have immediate damage, you may not be having your meeting place outside. So that has to be part of your plan. What would you do and that's going to vary from building and school to childcare setting. It's really going to be based on what you have available to you. So just always be adapting your plan and having those types of considerations are really what this webinar has been all about. What would you do if it wasn't like your normal plan?
The whole process of planning, is to really bring those questions up and think about, if the things I regularly use on a day-to-day basis are not available to me, what are my workarounds? What am I going to do? What am I going to need? And whether or not you are a member of the Access and Functional Needs community or not, you really have to assess your personal situation and take a look at what you use on and need on a regular daily basis, and take a look at what happens if that's not available, and how are you going to bridge that gap?
Thanks, Heidi. I'm going to read it's more of a not a question, but information being shared by Steve Granada. It says people might consider using rechargeable power banks with solar panels. They are relatively more expensive than gasoline generators, and they do not have the same wattage of life. Still, they may be a major improvement over no backup power and have a renewable energy source because they're solar. And there are, I'm seeing more and more of these becoming available as the technology improves, and it may provide for your needs. We also have a question that, back to Margaret, we have a little time for. I know this is maybe a complicated answer, but why is the Shake Alert app not working during real earthquakes?
Okay, the Shake Alert app is working. You may not be receiving the alert because it is not meeting the intensity threshold in your area. So with the app, the alert is being delivered if the magnitude is a 4.5 earthquake and the intensity of shaking is a level 3 or above at your location. So the earthquakes that occurred in July did not trigger the apps in Los Angeles because the shaking here was only an intensity 2. It was an intensity 8 at Ridgecrest, but as those waves propagate outward, they diminish in strength. So by the time they reached us here in Los Angeles, they were only an intensity 2. It did not trigger the app because the apps are set to trigger at an intensity 3 with a magnitude 4.5 earthquake, because that damage is going to start to occur at an intensity 4. Now, as we get feedback from people that say, no, they want those 2s anyway, even though there's not going to be damage, USGS may decide to lower that level, but right now that level is set at an intensity 3 of shaking where you are, or a magnitude 4.5 earthquake. But it was working. It has worked in all of our earthquakes.
So I've shared a picture of the shake map from that very large earthquake from last July, and you can see that near the epicenter it had severe shaking, but most people in the more populated areas of Southern California only experienced very weak shaking, and so were not notified. that there was an earthquake. And so it really will depend on where you are in terms of what type of notification you'll receive.
Yeah, and actually during that earthquake, the intensity of shaking was actually set higher. It was set at a level 4 of shaking. And that was lowered after that event when people reported that they would like to get the app to trigger at a lower intensity. So even though there's no damage, they would still like to know it. So it was lowered from a 4 to a 3 after the Ridgecrest earthquake. It's finding that balance between what are people going to complain about and what are they going to complain for on either side. So feedback is important.
There's also a comment that it would seem like the modified Mercalli scale would be most useful to us generally and not depend on the Richter scale.
Actually, that's exactly right. And we are trying to wean people over. We have for the past several years actually been trying to wean people over to understanding intensity or magnitude is on the Richter scale. That is the strength of that earthquake. So that is how scientists label that earthquake is based on the amount of energy that was created, and that is called magnitude. That does not change with that earthquake. The earthquake is a magnitude 5 or 6 or 7, does not change. What does change is the intensity, and that's what you care about, is what are you going to feel, because that is going to translate into damage. So what you actually care about is not the magnitude, because we can have a 7.8 on the San Andreas Fault, and maybe that doesn't affect you, and you might be further away from that event. But so what you care about is intensity of shaking, and that is the modified Mercalli scale, 1 to 10, 1 being not felt, 2 and 3, things are falling off the shelves, 4, 5, and 6, you're starting to have damage to buildings, you're starting to have casualties, 7, 8, and 9, you're starting to have heavy casualties, fatalities, and heavy damage to buildings. And so that's really what you care about, is the intensity of shaking. But the message is, when you get an alert or when you feel shaking, drop, cover, hold on, take protective actions now, because you don't know if that earthquake is going to become larger and the shaking is going to get stronger. So even if it's light shaking, still take protective actions, practice your drop, cover, hold on. If it was only an intensity 2 at your location, all you've done is practice, and that's what we want you to do anyway.
Thank you, Margaret. There's also a comment, there are many apps that you can install to track smaller events, and one distinction between a lot of those apps that are out there and have been available for many years is that they're letting you know where the earthquake was, usually within a minute or 2 or 3 after the earthquake stops shaking. So it gives you that information. Earthquake early warning app like MyShake is telling you that the earthquake is on its way, and it's a much faster message that is going out. If you are too close to the earthquake, you won't get it in time. But if you are kind of far enough away, you will get that notice. And as Margaret said, act immediately.
Yeah, and so what you're talking about here is a co-seismic tool of earthquake early warning. The earthquake is happening, not a prediction, the earthquake is happening, versus earthquake notification, which is information sent after the earthquake when all our stations have reported accurate information about the magnitude, location, and depth of that earthquake. And that you can get at through the USGS. It's called ENS, and so you can go to their website and sign up for earthquake notification.
Okay, there's one final question here before we end, and it's without emergency services available during a disaster, how might residents contain a house fire that evolves beyond handheld fire extinguishers?
Good question.
And I think this is also related to if the fire department's not able to come, and I think it really comes down to, again, your plan. Consider that possibility and work with your local fire department, get information on what ways it might be to help that situation. But it may be more the response of getting yourself safe and not trying to put out a large structure fire with an extinguisher, as mentioned in this question. But what other tools you might have. Jenny, did you have any insight on that by chance?
Just one thought or idea, because I don't think that you'll be able to do very much to save a structure in that situation while it's already happening. But I think that possibly consider some of the mitigation that we advise people that live in wildfire hazard areas to do. So don't have vegetation close to your house. Don't have a wood patio, the type of roof you have. I think that some of those things could minimize the damage or cause or prevent the fire from spreading to other buildings or through your backyard and everything. I don't think there's too much you can do though if, you know, water pressure might be compromised and you don't have the tools. But, you know, mitigation first, removing dead and dying brush from near your house, I think is a good rule of thumb, even if you're not in a wildfire hazard area for that reason.
And you can also, if you have a pool, you can utilize a pump system to pump the water out of your pool. And so a pool may not be drinkable in an earthquake, but you can use it for hygiene and for putting out fires. And that would, again, would be part of your preparedness to have a pump that you're able to do that.
Margaret, another question should people install both MyShake and Shake Alert LA if they're in the Los Angeles area?
That's a very good question. Know that all of these apps are under test mode. We really do not know how the cell phones are going to perform in a disaster. I'm right now running all three. Are they going to cancel each other out? We don't know. So far they have not. And so to run them, you can. We would definitely like your feedback on that. But knowing that these apps are still under test mode, we've not had a lot of large earthquakes to actually test whether that's going to be an issue. But know that there could be limitations on the mechanism that you're receiving it on, and that mechanism is the cell phone. So
you're getting the same signal from the same source, so you could probably only have one. You don't need to have both. But you as a backup, just to be sure, you might try having both.
Yeah, and they are in two of the, actually all three of these are providing you additional earthquake. You can go into another section of the app that shows you recent earthquakes, and so it has a map for that. That's extra usage of that, so it might slow your phones down. So you might just want to be running one.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you to all our panelists today. It is now time to end the webinar.